if you were to ask it right away. Okay. So I'm going to.
Yeah, one moment. Let me introduce you and start the meeting.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So good evening, everybody, and good morning to some of you on the other side of the globe. I welcome all of you to the lecture number 10, Subjunctive Relative Classes in Hindi-Urdu, to be delivered by Professor Rajesh Bhatt. I'm very happy to see many of you here. So I welcome Professor Shailendra Mohan, Director CIL, eminent linguists, Professor Subbarao, Professor Jaishilan, Professor Amritavalli, Professor Avdesh Mishra, Professor Lyudmila Koklova, our special guest, my colleagues, Dr. Tarikan, dear audience, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the CIL, I extend you a warm welcome to today's talk, which will be for the next 1.5 hours. I'm very happy to have with us today Professor Rajesh Bhatt, Professor of Linguistics from University of Massachusetts, United States of America. As most of you know him, he works mostly on comparative syntax of the modern Indo-Aryan languages. The topic that's very interesting to me, at least, is the syntax-semantic interface. He has been associated with UPenn with 3 adjoining grammars and 3 banks. He has his bachelor's in computer science, which is very interesting. From computer science, he moved to do his PhD at UPenn in 1999. And before moving to UMass, he taught in various places, including University of Texas in Austin for several years. He was also a visiting professor in MIT in 2003 and has started various places and various organizations like the Linguistic Society of America's Summer School, Cretling, LISM, LOT Summer Schools, and EGT. Besides syntax, he has contributed to many other areas. For instance, computational linguistics, because he being from computer science background, he has worked more on computational aspects of linguistic theory and 3 adjoining grammar, computationally constrained grammatical formalisms, among many other works. His focus on semantics is on aspect, counterfactuals, modality, negation, questions, and also, when I introduced him in the beginning, I said he works on modern Indo-Aryan languages, especially on comparative syntax, on agreement, ergativity, correlatives, tense aspect systems, negation. He's really a man with varied interests in linguistics and computational linguistics. Among syntax semantic interface, attention to infinitival clauses, cross-linguistic expression of obligation and possession, word order phenomena, and many other topics. He has a very long CV. Interested people should take a look at it, but I want to just brief on the various services he has been offering to the discipline of linguistics. He is in several departmental and university committees across the United States and also in other countries. He is a member of Graduate Admissions Committee for 4 decades, Philosophy Head Search Committee, Semantic Search Committee, Undergraduate Educational Council, is a co-chair of that. He is in the Semantic Search Committee, Colloquium Committee, Computational Linguistics Research Committee. He has been a very potential member of several such committees. We are very proud to know this as you are a fellow Indian. And also he has contributed his services to different journals. He has been co-editor of Journal of South Asian Linguistics, served as LSA Program Committee Chair for 3 years, served on NSF Linguistics panel. It's not easy to be on the NSF panel. and he was also the inaugural visiting guru for the University of Chicago in 2013. He's in the editorial boards of very, very important and internationally reputed journals like Linguistic Inquiry, Journal of Semantics, Natural Language Semantics, Editorial Board of Syntax. He has been an occasional reviewer for Semantics and Pragmatics, Language, Natural Language and Linguistic Theory, Natural Language Semantics, and of course, the topmost journal, Language. He has been reviewing a lot for other works as well. He has published extensively. He has a total of 53 articles in various international journals. He has delivered 75 invited talks, 43 conference talks and posted presentations. He edited several books. At least 7 of them are here in the CD what I got on the web. He's organized many conferences. It's indeed a pleasure and honor to CIL to have someone like you to talk in our series. I once again welcome you, and now the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. That was a very nice introduction. I had, I'm kind of embarrassed, but thank you. This is very nice. I hope I will not bore you in what follows. So let's get going. I have a lot of things to show you. The title of my talk is Subjunctive Relative Clauses in Hindi-Urdu, but in order to get to that, we'll actually spend a certain amount of time, I guess like the first 15 to 20 minutes of the talk, just getting used to getting familiar with the subjunctive. Because the subjunctive, it turns out, you can actually work on Hindi a fair bit and never get into the subjunctive. I can say this honestly for myself. I've been working on Hindi, I guess, all my career, and this is the first time that I've really run into the subjunctive in a serious way. So first, what is the subjunctive? So first, one easy way to get that we can be confident that we know what we're talking about is there is a certain paradigm that we call the subjunctive. Okay, so there is this form verb. For the verb go, ja, you have jaun, jaye, jaye, jao, jaye, jaye. Okay, and then the same paradigm exists in for be, but it's a little bit reduced. A lot of speakers will not say hoye, will just say ho, though apparently there might be dialectal variation there. Okay, so anyway, this is the paradigm. Now, there are some interesting things about this paradigm. For one thing, if you are into agreement, okay, and in particular, you're interested in person agreement, then you're very thankful for the subjunctive because it's the only place in the grammar of Hindi where you see person inflection on the main verb. Otherwise, person inflection is only there in Hindi on hai, on be. Okay, so you basically, the auxiliary be is the only place you would ever see person inflection, but thank God for the subjunctive because we see it here. Okay, and one thing is, we'll see as we go along, I mean, I'll be talking about how subjunctive clauses are in some sense dependent clauses, but there's no question about that, about the fact that by general definitions of what finiteness means, they are finite clauses. And one syntactic way I check for that is they permit overt subjects. Okay, and they also don't form directly, you can't use them as prenominal reduced relatives. Okay, so they're finite clauses. And there's one other point which is kind of interesting about the subjunctive, which is that the subjunctive is an ingredient of the future in Hindi-Urdu. And the future basically is literally the subjunctive plus this added piece of morphology, ga, which is inflected like a participle. Okay, so you basically take table 1 and you inflect ga like a participle in the standard way that we do, and in number and in gender, and you get the future. Okay, in fact, Masika, in his book on the Indo-Aryan languages, suggests that you should call a subjunctive contingent future. And there's the idea is that there is what I'm calling the future is the definite future, and this is the contingent future. So it's kind of like a maybe future, while this is a definitely future. And one place where you can see this at work in a very beautiful way is in the language Kashmiri. Okay, because in Kashmir, most of the Indo-Aryan languages have done something like this, that they take the contingent feature, they stick something on it, and it makes a definite future. Kashmiri did not do this. So in Kashmiri, this form, what I'm calling the subjunctive, is also drawn to do the future. And then, of course, if you want to do the future, then what you have to use an adverb. You have to say definitely and then this. And that's how you get the future. Okay, but that's a side fact. Okay, so where does the subjunctive appear? I said it's dependent. And the reason I say this is that you can't just put the subjunctive anywhere. There are severe restrictions on where the subjunctive can go. So let's take a factive verb like to know. And I've just chosen the dative version of it. So, मुझे पता है कि मीना जाएगी. This is fine because I have the future जाएगी. But if I say मुझे पता है कि मीना जाए, this is ungrammatical. You can't say that. Okay? On the other hand, if you have a desiderative verb like चाहना, to want, then you can say वीना चाहती है कि मीना जाए. In fact, it's kind of ungrammatical to say वीना चाहती है कि मीना जाएगी. That's weird. Okay. So what you see is that the embedding predicate is telling you something about the form of the embedded clause. This by itself is not a particularly shocking state of affairs. We're used to this. You know, there is selection. But what we'll see is that instead of talking about selection, perhaps a better way to talk about it is in terms of licensing. So that's going to be, I won't be using the term selection so much as licensing. So now in the next 4 or 5 pages, I'm just going to take you through a range of environments where the subjunctive appears in Hindi. And in this, so let me use this to put in a plug for one of my favorite descriptive grammars of Hindi. And that is a very unassuming little book called Intermediate Hindi Structures by Peter Hook. It is like one of the most insightful things I've read. Every time I start working on a phenomena, I go and open the chapter. There'll be like 3 pages, but an enormous amount of information. And now it's out of copyright and you can just download it. It's available online. So I encourage everyone to get, if you're interested in Hindi syntax, to read Intermediate Hindi Structures by Peter Hook. Okay, so a lot of this is from Peter Hook, who discusses this, and some discussion comes from the grammar by McGregor. Otherwise, I've not really found a lot of in-depth discussion. What you usually find is people say, yes, subjunctive exists, and it appears in, they give you 2 examples and they move on. So, okay, so where do we find it? So the first thing is that you find, what you note is that you don't get subjunctive in matrix clauses unless you combine it with a modifier that indicates uncertainty. Okay, so one such modifier is the adverb shayad, maybe. Okay, so here are some examples. So you can say, Mahesh shayad abhi aa raha ho. This is to be. Maybe Mahesh is coming now. Okay. Now, what is very important about this is that unquestionably, Mahesh abhi aa raha ho is ungrammatical. You cannot say Mahesh abhi aa raha ho. If you remove the shayad, the subjunctive cannot stand on its own in this example. You would have to switch it to Mahesh abhi aa raha hai. He is coming right now. But if you want to use ho, you need something else. And that something else here is shayad. Now, shayad is just one member of a fairly large class. There are other things. There are things which are slightly more Sanskritic. Sambhavtaha, sambhav hai ki, ho sakta hai, mumkin hai, namumkin hai. All of them do the same work. Okay, so all of these things you can combine and license the subjunctive. So this is part one. Now, one interesting thing, and maybe this is why Masika said, don't call this subjunctive, call this contingent future, is that in a lot of other languages, like the Romance languages, Lyudmila ji sent me some examples from Russian, but so I don't know about the Russian case actually, but I know that the Romance has a past subjunctive. Hindi-Urdu does not have a past subjunctive. So in Hindi-Urdu, when you use a subjunctive, you can only use it in environments where the anchor is the present. So let me give you an example. So take the same example with shayad, and suppose you want to convey doubt about the past. Then you don't have a choice. You have to say, shayad uske gale mein dard tha. Okay, that's you. If you try to say shayad uske gale mein dard ho, then it means maybe she has a sore throat, not maybe she had a sore throat. So this choice, as we'll see, between the present and the subjunctive disappears in the past tense. Okay. Now there is one other interesting fact about the subjunctive and shayad and these elements, that there seems to be optionality in the present. So you can say, शायद ये किताब आपके पास है. You can also say, शायद ये किताब आपके पास हो. Okay. If it's a funny feeling when you say these two sentences, their meanings are so close, but they feel different. And I'll come to this because I think we can use some of the diagnostics that we will develop to tease them apart. McGregor gives us a suggestion. McGregor says, when you're using the indicative, you are indicating probabilities. And when you're using the subjunctive, you are indicating a certain kind of uncertainty. So he's basically suggesting that these shayad and sambhav, they're actually ambiguous. Okay, between two meanings, one licenses the subjunctive, one the indicative. It's very attractive, but it's very slippery. So it's good to have a diagnostic, and I think I will have one. Okay, so this is uncertainty. Let's move on quickly. We've already seen that want licenses the subjunctive if it takes a finite clause complement. So बच्चा चाहता है कि तांगा तेज चले. Okay. Then there are a bunch of other things that will also do it. चाहिए ज़रूरी है अच्छा हो. So 6b is an example from 1979, and you can learn about inflation by reading this example. ये ज़रूरी नहीं कि भिखारी को पूरा 1 रुपया दो. It's not necessary that you give a whole rupee to the beggar. This, I guess it made sense in 1979. Okay, so let's continue with this. There is an interesting fact, which is that at least some of these verbs also take infinitival complements. And there's a distribution of division of labor between whether you use the infinitival complement or the subjunctive complement. So the rough guide is this. If the embedded subject is the same as the matrix subject, you want to use the infinitival complement. So if you want to say that Farooq wants that Farooq win the race, then you want to say 7b, Farooq race jeetna chahta hai. Okay? But if you want to say that Farooq wants that someone else win the race, then you would say Farooq chahta hai ki wo race jeete. But there is one exception here. In the semantic literature on control, people have noted that 7b obligatorily has a de se meaning. That is, it is a thought about the self. If Farooq has a thought about himself, but he doesn't know that that thought is about himself, you can actually use a wo, which is co-referent. So the obviation effect that you get in 7 is only for the de se reading. Okay. Then I want to show you one other example, which I found in Hook, which I think is beautiful, and it relates, I think, to some work that was discussed in a paper, I think on Slovenian by Černič and Trin, or Trin and Černič. So So let's start with this. So verbs like think don't normally take the subjunctive. So you can say, मैं सोचता हूँ कि तुम आज जल्दी सो जाओगे. This is 8a. I think that you will fall asleep early tonight. Okay. But you can also say, मैं सोचता हूँ कि आज तुम जल्दी सो जाओ. And here you're giving someone an instruction. You're saying, I think you should go to bed early tonight. Okay. So the meaning changes. The meaning really changes depending upon whether you have the future underneath or whether you have the subjunctive. In one case, I'm not just thinking, I'm telling you something. I'm telling you to do something. While in the other case, I'm just repeating a thought. I'm just informing you about the inner workings of my mind. Okay. And the same thing is true in line. Okay. Okay. So that's uncertainty, desire. And now we get to case number 3, which is requests for permissions and suggestions. So, so this is very interesting that basically the subjunctive here just works like a modal. So I can ask someone a question. And in this case, generally when I ask the question, the subject, I'm asking it about myself. Kaun se kele loon? Which banana should I take? And the person could reply, aap hare wale lein. You should take the green ones. Okay. The next example, I apologize, it's a bit sexist, but it demonstrates that you can ask a question about a third person also. Meri patni bahar naukri kare ya ghar par rahe? And the person replies, aap unhi se पूछें. Okay. So in this case, what's important is that the subject is a third person. Okay. And what's interesting is that you can also have this embedding. You can have an indirect command, and it's similar to what we saw earlier. Unse kahiye ki yahan aaye. Tell him to come here. Okay. Tell him that he comes here. Okay. So this is yet another case. Okay. And one other fact that's worth noting is that the imperative paradigm coincides with that of the subjunctive apart from the second person singular. Okay. So that's the place where the subjunctive. So for example, if I am rude and I'm telling you to leave, I can say tu ja. Okay. Not tu jaye. Okay. But I can say main chahta hu ki tu jaye. Okay. So that's the one point where the subjunctive and the imperative come apart. But otherwise, I think it's very tempting to say to unify the two. So now we get to a different kind of domain, and in the end, I'm not even sure that this is unified with what I've been talking about, but you do get the subjunctive here. So conditional clauses are a place. So here there is 12a from Hook. अगर किताबों वाली दुकानें सुबह खुल जाती हों तो हम आज ही ले सकेंगे. And then, like, if you like Hindi movie songs, this is a classic song. ये दुनिया अगर मिल भी जाए तो क्या है? Okay, so what if even if one gets the world, so what? Okay, so you get jaye here. Okay. Another domain which has been of a lot of semantic interest is the unconditional. And in the unconditional, also, you get the subjunctive. So the chahe, which appears in the unconditional, is itself in the subjunctive, arguably. But you can say, chahe meena jaye ya na jaye, main to jaunga. Meena aaye ya na aaye, main to jaunga. So you're getting a subjunctive in this location. And you also get it in plain free relatives. So this is an example from McGregor, which does not seem to be an unconditional. It is just a regular correlative. तुमने जो कुछ लिखा हो उसे दिखाना. Show him whatever you've written. Okay, so I think it's important that you have jo kuch here, which is it's an ever free relative. And this has been discussed in the literature that ever free. There's very interesting work by Rajesh, which sort of goes on this angle. He plays with the idea that in some languages, when you get subjunctive in free relatives, it's doing the work of ever. So this is, and then there is one case which I just don't know what to do with. And I agree with the judgment, but I don't know why the subjunctive is appearing here. So this is an example from McGregor in 15. बच्चा दरवाजे पर ऐसे खड़ा था जैसे किसी के इंतजार में हो. As if he is. So there you can sort of see that perhaps there's something conditional like, but I don't know I can't really fit it. I just wanted to put all the examples just in case people had some thoughts about them. Okay, so now that I've drowned you with data, let me give you a very abstract characterization to help you to arrange this data in your head. So the presence of the subjunctive indicates a higher modal operator. So you have something like shayad, zaruri, chahiye, cha, or it doesn't have to be modal, it can be an attitude operator. And there is some kind of a tense dependence between the tense of the modal attitude operator and the subjunctive. So the subjunctive must be interpreted at or after the time of the interpretation of the modal attitude operator. Okay, so I'm going to give you a very syntactic metaphor. In the end, I think what's happening here is fairly semantic, but in many cases, syntax and semantics, we can talk about them with similar metaphors. So we can think of it being the subjunctive as being like a reflexive that needs an appropriate binder, a modal or attitude operator. So when we see a subjunctive, we should ask, what is licensing this subjunctive? And in technical terms, what is binding its world variable? What is this guy dependent on? Okay, I'm not saying that indicatives are not dependent on other things. In fact, most of the time they are. It's just that they don't have to be. Okay, so think about them, indicatives, as being like free pronouns, which can be bound, but they don't have to be. Okay, while subjunctives in that sense are like reflexives. Not only they can be bound, they have to be bound. Okay, so just a reminder, not all attitude predicates can license a subjunctive. So factives do not. Mujhe pata hai ki Meena jaye, bad. So I think this is probably because factives do not support the kind of tense dependence that subjunctives require. And I'm not going to give you that theory because I think it's going to be very complicated. What we learn from Romance subjunctives is that subjunctives are really, the distribution problem is a daunting one. But what we can basically take this is as there is a certain class of predicates that are subjunctive licensors that can do the trick. And a future project is to maybe clarify what does a predicate need. I think the tense properties are relevant, but there might be other properties. Okay, so I spent half of my time just setting up the subjunctive before getting to the point of my talk. Okay, so now we will start with subjunctive relative clauses. And relative clauses are interesting because complement clauses are dependent upon their embedder in a way that relative clauses are not. So one thing we know about relative clauses is that they can take scope somewhat independent of the clause where they appear. Okay, their world variables are not dependent in the same way that the world variables of complement clauses are dependent. Okay, and this is where subjunctive relative clauses are going to be cool, because just to remove the suspense, what I will say is that subjunctive relative clauses, unlike indicative relative clauses, will be forced to be dependent because that's what a subjunctive is. It's dependent. Okay, so that's but we'll take some time to get there. So let's start with a very nice example from McGregor, which is in 18. मुझे एक ऐसी किताब चाहिए जो बच्चों के लिए उपयुक्त हो. Okay, I want a book suitable for children. You'll see, note that there is, in addition to all the other things that you might expect in a relative clause, there is one other thing here. You have this aisi, or which is a form of aisa, which means something like such. Okay, and to my ear, if I remove aisa from these examples degrade. Note that I'm not saying they're ungrammatical. I'm just saying that they're not as lovely. Okay, so I mean, 18 is how I would want to say this. There's a reason McGregor put aisa there. मुझे एक किताब चाहिए जो बच्चों के लिए उपयुक्त हो feels kind of weird. And 19b sounds to me even weirder. मुझे वो किताब चाहिए जो बच्चों के लिए उपयुक्त हो. Okay. And what is interesting is that this aisa need is there only when you have the subjunctive. If you go to the indicative, you don't need an aisa. मुझे एक किताब चाहिए जो बच्चों के लिए उपयुक्त है. मुझे वो किताब चाहिए जो बच्चों के लिए उपयुक्त है. Perfect. Okay. However, you might think, okay, maybe aisa is needed for the subjunctive, but that's not true. Aisa alone is not needed for the subjunctive. So let's look at this example. So first, we see a case where the subjunctive is not okay. रवि ने किताब जो सेल पर है खरीद ली. रवि ने हर किताब जो सेल पर है खरीद ली. You cannot say रवि ने हर किताब जो सेल पर हो खरीद ली. Totally out. Now, if you in this case you put in an aisa, it does not help. रवि ने हर ऐसी किताब जो सेल पर है, रवि ने हर ऐसी किताब जो सेल पर हो खरीद ली. That doesn't help. Okay. So aisa helps, but it does not license the subjunctive. So this is the dependence we have to keep in mind. Okay. So why, but we know why 21 is bad. You can tell me why 21 is bad, right? I said you need a licensor. Look at 21, and aisa is not a licensor. There is no modal operator. There is nothing that will take care of the subjunctive. That's why this is bad. Okay. And we can also explain the acceptability of 18. Why is the subjunctive okay? Because there's this chahiye here. This chahiye is licensing the whole. Okay. So let's, yeah. So and this is an example from hook 22, which shows that chahiye can under certain circumstances take a finite clause complement, and then it does license a subjunctive. पहले ये चाहिए कि मसाले मिल जाएं. First, we have to get the spices. Okay. First, it is needed that we get the spices. Okay. So here you can get the subjunctive. So there is another thing to note, that it's not like in the example that we have from McGregor, there is no finite clause with the subjunctive. The chahiye is directly doing the licensing. But I just put 22 here to show you that this is an environment. Chahiye does license the subjunctive. Okay. And that's why it also licenses the subjunctive in a relative clause. Okay. So here is an initial characterization. What a subjunctive relative clause needs is that the head of relative clause is modified by aisa, such, and there is a higher modal operator from the right semantic class. So you need these two things. B is necessary. A is also necessary, but I'm not sure it's at the same level. Okay. So, but now what we're going to do is we're going to tighten 23. So since I already gave you a metaphor, right? I said, think of subjunctive like a reflexive. So at this point, you should say, okay, you've given us this metaphor, now deliver on it. When we see reflexives, we expect locality. Okay, reflexives, one thing we know about reflexives is that they need to be bound by a local binder. So if you say something like, John thinks that Ravi likes himself, it cannot mean that John is talking about himself. Ravi has to be the binder. And you can also do this, for example, in Hindi with apne aap. Right? So here I'm going to show you one case where what I will do is I will have a licensor, but I'm going to put a non-licensor, like a factive, in between. And we'll see that things don't work so well. So to my ear, 24a, which is what I have is a want, then what I have is no, and then I have the relative clause. Okay, I find that to not be so good. Okay, मुझे एक ऐसी किताब चाहिए जो तुम्हें पता है कि बच्चों के लिए उपयुक्त है. That's fine because I use the indicative. मुझे एक ऐसी किताब चाहिए जो तुम्हें पता है कि बच्चों के लिए उपयुक्त हो. I find that degraded. Okay. And to my mind, the way I'm thinking about it is that the licensor, because there's in between, you have a non-licensing operator, you cannot get a subjunctive here. Okay. And now I'm going to bring you back to this example from McGregor, where we saw that you can have संभव है कि वो fail हो गया है, संभव है कि वो fail हो गया हो. Okay. You can get both the subjunctive and the indicative. And we have the sense that there's a subtle difference. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to put a subjunctive relative clause in this embedded clause and see if it gets licensed or not. And what I found to my ear, when you have a subjunctive clause, finite subjunctive clause, you can have a subjunctive relative clause. You can also have an indicative relative clause. Indicatives are free. You can put them in. Indicative relative clauses can appear wherever. But when you have an indicative clause, then having a subjunctive clause underneath it is icky. Okay, so let's just look at 26A and 26C. संभव है कि उसने एक ऐसी किताब खरीदी हो जो बच्चों के लिए उपयुक्त ना हो. Fine, this is perfect. Okay. Let's also do the indicative. संभव है कि उसने एक ऐसी किताब खरीदी है जो बच्चों के लिए उपयुक्त नहीं है. This is also fine. Now the crucial case is 26C. संभव है कि उसने एक ऐसी किताब खरीदी है जो बच्चों के लिए उपयुक्त ना हो. This I find not so good. Okay. This is, I have to admit, maybe I shouldn't have put a star here. I should have put some question marks. Okay. So this again suggests to me that basically maybe McGregor was on the right track, that when the modal has a probability, meaning it doesn't license a subjunctive in the matrix clause, and since it doesn't license a subjunctive there, it also doesn't license, then of course it's not going to license the relative clause. Okay. So this is something about licensing. Now let's get to the role of ऐसा. Okay. So here are the relevant contrasts with ऐसा. मुझे एक ऐसी किताब चाहिए जो बच्चों के लिए उपयुक्त हो. Fine. मुझे एक किताब चाहिए जो बच्चों के लिए उपयुक्त हो. Off. Okay. So here is a worry of mine. I think 27B and C are definitely degraded compared to 27A, but are they really bad? I'm not sure. Okay, but here is what I can tell you. I've been scouring the internet for subjunctive relative clauses, and the vast majority of subjunctive relative clauses appear with ऐसा. So instead of, I'll give you a suggestion as to why ऐसा might be bad, might be degraded, why the absence of ऐसा with subjunctives might be degraded. But first, let's see what is ऐसा doing. Okay, so here are certain structures that you could imagine, right? You have ऐसा, which is a modifier combining with the NP, and then there's the relative clause and this. Okay, and the ET is just indicating that these are all giving property type meanings. Okay, but actually these structures, if you stare at them, you realize this, what I've written here can't be right, because ऐसा, and if you look at this tree, it looks like ऐसा is doing its own thing and the relative clause is doing its own thing. But that's not what's happening. ऐसा refers to the relative clause. There's an anaphoric relationship between ऐसा and the relative clause. ऐसा means like that, and what's that? Or ऐसा means like this, and what's this? This is the relative clause. Okay, so the relationship has to be something like this: that there's a relative clause which binds the ऐसा, and then the ऐसा modifies the NP. Okay, so, and what might ऐसा be doing? So it's useful to look at the syntax of ऐसा, because ऐसा is almost certainly complex. ऐसा has two components. It has the anaphoric component a, and then you have the sa, right? And sometimes the sa can come apart. You can see that sa is not always a strictly bound morpheme. So it's a bound morpheme in ऐसा, वैसा, जैसा, कैसा. But in Ram जैसा or Ram sa, I don't know whether sa is just jaisa contracted, or at this point sa has also become an independent morpheme. But in any case, what this is giving you is, it's saying not necessarily this, but like this. So you point at a certain thing and then you get things in its radius, in its halo. Okay, so the speculation, the idea that I am going to suggest is that when you have normal relative clauses, you just intersect them. So the indicative relative clause gives you a property, the NP gives you a property, you do a set intersection, and you're all done. But the subjunctive relative clause does not give you the right kind of property. Maybe it varies in worlds or something, and so as a result, when you try to do the intersection, it doesn't go so well. So what you do is you feed it into the RC binds the A, and then the like comes in, and the like extracts something that can then combine with the NP. Okay, so that's my speculation as to why we need ESA. What I am fairly convinced by is that one should not try to do subjunctive relative clauses the way we do normal relative clauses, which is where we ordinarily what we say is NP combines with the CP, intersect them, go on. Here, it's a more mediated intersection. It's not directly with the NP. The NP is really just combining with the ESA. Okay, one puzzle, this is a question maybe for Utpal. In subjunctive relative clauses in other languages don't seem to use this ESA there. They can combine directly. So I wonder what goes on in those languages, this might even be an issue in Russian. Maybe there is maybe what Hindi is doing with ESA, they're doing covertly. And since Hindi has an explicit way of doing it, it prefers to use it, but maybe it is possible. So I see there is a question, Lyudmila ji, yes? You're muted. You're still muted.
No, I want to say that in Russian it is exactly like that. We need ESA is такой, yes. I need such this type of.
Okay. Excellent.
So exactly. No, we can say without ESA, but with ESA in Russian it's much better, exactly like in Hindi.
Okay, that is very good to hear. Thank you. Okay, but yeah, so then the question will remain, I guess, for Spanish. Okay, so now I want to kind of end with this section with one additional point, which is that with the puzzle, which is that this ESA fact is only about subjunctive relative clauses. It doesn't hold for subjunctive correlatives. Okay, so look at 30A, which is a subjunctive correlative. जिसे सेवा करने में मौज आती हो, वो सबकी सेवा कर सकता है. One who gets pleasure from helping, that person can help everyone. Okay, and here I don't need the ESA. I can say ऐसा व्यक्ति सबकी सेवा कर सकता है, such a person, but it's not needed. So I don't know what's going on. So I suspect that subjunctive correlatives and subjunctive free relatives are going to have a slightly different analysis from subjunctive headed relatives or these. So I'm not going to say much more, but what I've put in examples here saying that even in subjunctive correlatives, there is licensing by a modal. So this subjunctive correlative in 30A is working because there is this modal sakta in the main clause. If I change 30A to 31A, where I remove the modal, and instead of having can serve, I have a matrix clause which is select, which is just indicate non-modal, then it's not so good. जिसे सेवा करने में मौज आती हो, मीना ने उसे चुना. I have to say, जिसे सेवा करने में मौज आती है, मीना ने उसे चुना. Okay, so the whole hair distinction is relevant here. Okay, but that's all I have to say here. And now I'm sort of getting towards the last section. So now I'm going to try and relate a little bit what happens in Hindi with the situation for Spanish. And here I rely upon work by Maribel Romero, Josep Kerr, and the person I think who sort of started this discussion, Donka Farkas, and a survey by Antonio Fabregas. Okay, so in Spanish, you get the distinction in 32A and 32C, and you can sort of, I'll just walk you through 32B and 32D, which is basically the same. So 32B is with the subjunctive. उन्हें एक ऐसी गाड़ी चाहिए जो सुंदर दिखती हो. Okay, versus indicative. उन्हें एक ऐसी गाड़ी चाहिए जो सुंदर दिखती है. Okay. So I'm going to read what Fabregas writes, quoting Kerr. According to Kerr, in the first case, the subjunctive in the relative clause marks that the descriptive content of the clause must not be evaluated in the default epistemic model of the speaker, but in a subordinate booletic model that is relative to the desires of they. In the second case, with indicative, there is no model shift. The descriptive content is evaluated inside the epistemic model, triggering the entailment that the speaker or the referent of they believe that in their actual world, there is a referent that satisfied this description. Okay, so I think the facts hold for Hindi. If you say, "Unhe ek aisi gaadi chahiye jo sundar dikhti ho," so they are saying this is the kind of car that we would like. But they are used to, they might live in a town where there are no beautiful cars, and they might be resigned to the fact that there is no such car. Why, if you use the indicative, you're assuming that there is such a car, and you're saying, I want that kind of car. I want that car. Okay, so there is a difference, and this is an idea that will pop up again and again, that in B, there is no assumption that this relative clause has an extension in the real world, while in the indicative example, there is an expectation that there is a car of this sort. And I will try to make this point. I have some examples with ghosts, which I think make a similar point. Okay. So I have some examples from Romero, which I tried to construct, but I couldn't but I'll show you another example of this sort. Okay, so this is I have a very active imagination, and I like to set up these very cinematic scenarios. So imagine, let's look at 34A versus 34B. So 34A says, इशिता चाहती है कि रीना एक गुंडे से शादी करे जिसे मोबाइल चलानी आती है. Okay, so Ishita wants Reena to marry a gangster who knows how to ride a motorcycle. Okay, and then the subjunctive. Ishita चाहती है कि रीना एक ऐसे गुंडे से शादी करे जिसे मोबाइल चलानी आती हो. So now let me set up two scenarios. The first scenario is a scenario where Ishita wants Reena to marry Kabir. Ishita thinks that Kabir is a really nice guy. In reality, he's a motorcycle driving gangster, but she has no idea. Okay. I can describe this situation. I know this fact about Kabir. Ishita doesn't. I can use 34A to describe this situation. I cannot use 34B to describe this situation. Okay. However, now imagine a different situation. Ishita needs Reena to marry a motorcycle driving gangster. She doesn't care who Reena marries as long as the husband-to-be is a motorcycle driving gangster. Then in that case, I can use 34A and 34B. So basically what we see, and this is the point that Romero was trying to make, is that you do not have a transparent reading. You cannot interpret this is read as a description. And this is also a point that McGregor makes. He says, look, if you're giving general recipes, if you're giving a property as opposed to something specific, then you use the subjunctive. Okay. And one way to cash that out is to say, hey, that's because you can't have a transparent reading. That's because the world variable of this property has to be bound under want. Okay, so that's one point. Okay, and so now I'm going to show you some very complicated examples. And these are based on a point that Romero noted. What she noted was that when you took relative clauses on a WH phrase in Spanish and you displaced them, so WH moved them, even then those relative clauses, those WH phrases behaved semantically as if they were in the scope of the subjunctive licensor. And this was not the case for indicatives. Okay, and this is what I'm going to show you now. Okay, so let's start first with a situation where we have Samir. Samir believes in ghosts, okay, and he believes that one of those ghosts likes him, and he wants Meena to meet that ghost because he says, look, this ghost is my friend, I want you to meet this ghost. So you can say, समीर चाहता है कि मीना उस भूत से मिले जो उसे पसंद करता है. So now in this case, Samir definitely believes that such a ghost exists. Do we believe such a ghost exists? I'm not so sure. Maybe, maybe not. Okay. But you can then front this entire thing. उस भूत से जो उसे प्यार करता है, समीर चाहता है कि मीना मिले. Here I feel that I'm committing myself to the existence of this ghost, and I'm committing myself to the belief in this ghost, maybe a little bit more than in 36A. Okay. And then 36C and D are just reveal an additional point which is going to become important on the next page. So what you see is that 36C is a case. Sorry, I should have put a star here because this is a condition C violation. I say this here, but I should have put a star here. वो चाहता है कि मीना उस भूत से मिले जो समीर को पसंद करता है. If you say this sentence, there's nothing wrong with this sentence, but this wo cannot be Samir. Okay, this is just condition C. Now, what is interesting is that when you do fronting, उस भूत से जो समीर को पसंद करता है, वो चाहता है कि मीना मिले. My sense is that in this case, the condition C effect disappears. This wo can be Samir. Okay, so basically what this tells me is that when you front this, then the indicative relative clause, you can just leave it here. You don't have to interpret it in the scope of want. Okay, so this is just all control. Okay, because we've not seen, this is all indicative relative clauses. Now we come to subjunctives. समीर चाहता है कि मीना ऐसे भूत से मिले जो उसे पसंद करता है. Okay. So now in this case, sorry, I said it wrong. समीर चाहता है कि मीना ऐसे भूत से मिले जो उसे पसंद करता हो. Okay. Now, Samir is not committed to the existence of a ghost who likes him. What Samir's desire is the following. It's a conditional desire. It says, I hope there is a ghost who likes me. And if there is such a ghost, I want Meena to meet that ghost. Okay, he's not saying that such a ghost, he's not assuming that such a ghost exists. However, if I say, Samir चाहता है कि मीना ऐसे भूत से मिले जो उसे पसंद करता है, then Samir assumes that there are such ghosts who like him and he wants Meena to meet one of them. Okay, so the hair versus ho. So the hair there is not even completely transparent, but hair indicates that according to Samir, such a thing exists. While with ho, that's not the case. Okay. So now we can front this. ऐसे भूत से जो उसे पसंद करता हो, समीर चाहता है कि मीना मिले. Okay. Same, the judgment doesn't change. Okay. C is a condition C violation. वो चाहता है कि मीना ऐसे भूत से मिले जो समीर को पसंद करता हो. The sentence is fine, but there's a condition C violation and there should be a star here. Now, the crucial example for me is this, D. ऐसे भूत से जो समीर को पसंद करता हो, वो चाहता है कि मीना मिले. My intuition is that in this case, I get a condition C violation. For me, getting co-reference between wo and Samir is much harder here. So this is very different from the indicative one, because here I'm describing this person's thought. This is part of this he's thought. And so this whole thing has to be interpreted in the scope, this whole relative clause and this whole NP has to be interpreted in the scope of want. And consequently, this gets, when you put it down, the Samir gets in the scope of wo, and you get a condition C violation. So that's what's going on. Okay, so now I think I'm basically done. I just want to show you that there are cases which I've not really handled. There are cases where it looks to me like other things are playing a role. So I found an example where it looks like negation is licensing the subjunctive. So 38A, हाई कोर्ट ने कहा कि ऐसा कोई फतवा मान्य नहीं है जो न्याय व्यवस्था के विपरीत हो. Okay, so I think it's the nahi. I don't think it's the acceptable that's doing it, because if I remove the negation, this becomes, to me, that I think this is not so good. हाई कोर्ट ने कहा कि ऐसा फतवा मान्य है जो न्याय व्यवस्था के अनुकूल हो. Slightly off. Okay. Then there are other cases where a matrix subjunctive seems to license an embedded subjunctive. So कैसे ऐसा गाना खोजें जिसके बारे में आप कुछ नहीं जानते हो? How to search for a song about which you don't know anything. So here there's a subjunctive up here, and I think it's licensing the subjunctive down here. And then there are licensing by requests. So this is from a ghazal. कहिए ऐसी बात जो दिल में लगा दे आग सी. Okay, so लगा दे. What did I do? I missed something. I should have put subjunctive. This day is subjunctive. So I should, the gloss is missing that. Yeah. So kahiye is licensing the day. Or here, this is like from a workbook. ऐसी तीन संख्याएं बताएं जो समांतर श्रेणी में हों और जिनका योगफल 21 तथा अंतिम दो संख्याओं का गुणनफल 63 हो. Okay. So please tell me three numbers that are equally spaced such that their sum is 21 and the product of the last two numbers is 63. I actually did this. It's 5, 7, and 9. Okay. And then I'm going to end with this just for fun, because I wanted to show you that sometimes, you know, I have this fear sometimes that all the interesting things that I work on, they are dropping out of the language and people are not using them anymore. So the subjunctive is alive and well. So this is a poem that I actually, people on my family group were sending this to each other as part of their good morning messages. Okay, so, and I realized that this is all subjunctive. आशाएं ऐसी हों जो मंजिल तक ले जाएं, मंजिल ऐसी हो जो जीवन जीना सिखा दे, जीवन ऐसा हो जो रिश्तों की कदर करे और रिश्ते ऐसे हों जो याद करने को मजबूर कर दें. So you have a subjunctive, may one hopes be such that, and then you have a subjunctive relative clause. And that's happening in all of them. In each of these, you have a may kind of thing in the matrix, and that's licensing a subjunctive in the embedded clause. Okay, it's 9 o'clock and I will stop.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rajesh, for your wonderful talk. And now the talk is open for discussion.
Okay, yeah, Professor Subbarao. Yeah, so was that a hand? I see a raised hand, but...
Yes,
Rajesh.
Subbarao.
Yes.
Yeah, sorry. I was muted. I said I liked your idea of showing the relationship of binding in the reflexives and subjunctive. So it's a wonderful idea. And of course, you have taken it much farther. And the data is really very insightful data. And the conclusions are also very insightful. I am really impressed. Perhaps one of the most enjoyable talks of yours that I have listened to. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. That is very good to hear. Yeah, no, it's I have to say this is a topic that I just recently got interested in, and I realized that there was just it has not attracted as much attention. I think actually, if anyone knows literature on the subjunctive in Hindi, please tell me, because I have not come across much. Right? Yeah. So I have not come across a lot. I just a memory came to me that maybe there's something by Ghanshyam Sharma. Maybe it might be something by him which I should look up, but I don't know of much. So in part, my attempt here was to collect the data in one place, so that then we can start theorizing about it.
Yeah, just I want to bring another point to your notice, namely Isa and Ye, they are interchangeable in complement clauses. उसने ये कहा कि मैं जा रहा हूँ, उसने ऐसा कहा कि मैं जा रहा हूँ. So, and the both can be deleted. उसने कहा कि मैं जा रहा हूँ. So,
I see, yes.
in my...
Oh, that's interesting. And I don't know if it's cognate, but I know that in some, maybe this is in Marathi or somewhere, like the complement, isn't there some some language where the complementizer is something like asa?
Yes, Marathi.
That's Marathi, right?
Marathi has three complementizers. One is the initial one, the other one is the bole type, manun, and the other, the asa is the third one.
Okay, and is asa, I wonder if asa is related to esa.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So this is, thank you. So I had not, so there is one further point that I actually want to make, because I was going to put it in the handout, but it had already gotten too long. And this complementizer point is very interesting. So here is a fact about Hindi. So in Hindi, when you have complement clauses, they can sometimes appear with noun phrases. So you can say,
ये बात की
मुझे ये पता है, I know this, मुझे ये बात पता है.
Yes.
Okay, but मुझे ये बात पता है कि सीता देर से आएगी, कि सीता जा चुकी है. But मुझे बात पता है कि सीता जा चुकी है is weird.
Yes.
If you just have a noun phrase without the anaphoric component, without the ye, right? And so that's the same pattern, which is that in order to add something, you need to have this hook, right? Yes. And that also tells us something interesting, I think, which is that if you look at, like, if you start with English, right, where we would, if you say the claim, we would give the complement clause, the complement clause we would put as a sister of claim. But really, the dependence is not on claim. The dependence is on the demonstrative.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So I think this is probably part of the same pattern. And then there is one other thing which is interesting here, which is that the complementizer that we get here is the demonstrative that we get in these environments is the distal demonstrative. Sorry, no, is the proximal. Is the ye.
You cannot
is the ye, and not were, which is what you get in the correlative. And maybe it's related to the fact that in these cases it's following, right? Yes. While in the correlative it's preceding.
Yes.
So it's probably, I mean, I don't know how to model this, but thank you. Yes. So yeah. So the complementizer, I think that link is very interesting. Complementizer,
yeah. I just want to bring to your notice, in my thesis, PhD dissertation, 1973, long time ago, almost 50 years ago, I have a whole chapter on Ye and Isa.
Excellent. Okay, I will. I think I have your thesis, so
yes,
I will go.
You have it.
I will read it.
You might like to take a look at it.
Yeah, I will do that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But it's a very good talk. Lots of insightful things have been mentioned, and how we have kind of integrated the whole thing. That's what I liked and loved it. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Ludmila ji and then Sadaf. Hi, Sadaf.
Yes. I wanted to ask about two things. Maybe because I don't know the language well. First, मैं सोचता हूँ कि तुम आज जल्दी सो जाओ. So,
Yes.
is it imperative or subjunctive? And if we change तुम for up, what should there be? मैं सोचता हूँ कि आप आज जल्दी सो जाइए या जल्दी सो जाएं. What should be the correct?
I think you're right. I think my intuition is that मैं सोचता हूँ कि आज तू जल्दी सो जा. I prefer the ja, so it probably is. You're right. So that's a very good point. And embedded. So yes. So it looks like, at least judging by the second person singular test, this is an embedded imperative. And so that actually fits even more so with this work that I mentioned by this work on Slovenian and by Černič and Trin, where they are talking about embedded imperatives. They're not talking about, they're saying imperatives can be embedded, and so this is really that. So yes, so I think you should not say that you don't know the language well. I think you know the language very well. Yeah, but anyway, so I think your gut instinct is correct. I think that's judging by the fact that in the second singular you get the ja form and not the jai form. That is probably an embedded imperative, and it's just that, as I said, everywhere else the imperative and the subjunctive coincide. So.
And one more sentence I didn't follow well about this Bhatt. So,
yes.
Whom should usse? How do we know that it is bound by the main hero, but not by?
No, so no, we don't know it, but we can just ask: is it possible? So, I had intended for, in fact, in all of the examples, I have the boldface. I'm only interested in the interpretation where the usse is Samir is talking about the Bhatt liking Samir. That's the interesting interpretation, because if I'm interested in someone else, that meaning is always available. There are absolutely no restrictions on that. So like usse, suppose usse refers to Ravi or something, right? Then that meaning is not going to change. So I'm just, the way I'm working with is I fixed in my head the interpretation where Samir is talking about the ghosts liking Samir. Okay, and then I'm asking what the pronoun can refer to. Does that answer the question?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
And there was, I'm sorry it was in Russian, there was a very good book by Liperovsky about this subjunctive mood.
Okay, yeah, okay, Liperovsky. Yes, so I'll see if I can. I have several Russian students here in our department right now. Maybe I can ask. And yeah, I feel like I mean, I sometimes wish I knew Russian, because then I could read the Russian novels in Russian, and then I could also read Liperovsky, because I find he's someone like, he's like a man of mystery. I always find that he has done interesting things. Like he has done some very interesting work on Braj, but which thankfully is there in English also. But anyway, I will try and get hold of this. I'll ask you for the reference, and then I can see if I can get some to read it. Okay, and then I can ask my students if they can tell me about it. Thank you. Okay, Sadaf.
Hi, Rajesh, and hi, everybody. Good to see you.
Yes.
I missed part of the talk in the morning. I was still waking up.
Oh, yeah, it's even earlier for you.
It's 8 now, 8:10.
Yeah, I was saying, yeah.
Yeah, I had some of the sentences. I don't have any specific questions because I haven't studied this topic, but some of the sentences that I was thinking about, like you said, मैं सोचता हूँ आप आज जल्दी सो, तुम आज जल्दी सो जाओ. It doesn't work for me. I would rather say मैं चाहता हूँ तुम आज जल्दी सो जाओ और मुझे लगता है तुम आज जल्दी सो जाओ.
Oh, so actually, that may be okay. So if you can do, in fact, for me, I think everybody would accept chahta, but for me, the lagta, I think I can accept it, but for me, the preferences are reversed. The example that I gave here, that I like, but the lagta one, but I think, so lagta is actually kind of interesting because lagta feels less like a command, sochta, but maybe it's still a very indirect kind of. Sort of like, how would you say the example that Yudmila ji brought up with the tu? मुझे लगता है कि आज तू जल्दी सो जा. Is that good? But definitely, I don't like मुझे लगता है कि
Rajesh, I find it difficult to accept.
It doesn't sound good because when you say मुझे लगता है, it sounds more polite.
Okay, yes. So maybe then we can't.
मुझे लगता है आज तुम जल्दी सो जाओ या आज आप जल्दी सो जाइए.
Yeah, that sounds perfect. That sounds perfect. Yeah. So maybe there's a register clash happening there because of the politeness. So मुझे लगता है is like super indirect, right? Like almost like passive aggressive kind of like I feel I don't even
that I do this.
I feel that it would be better. Yeah. So you would. This is not the kind of thing you would say to your child, right? You're telling them.
No. No.
No. But but this is something you might say to an elder, like who's been working too hard, and you're saying, "मुझे लगता है कि आज आप जल्दी सो जाइए." So that's an interesting point. So that there might actually be some variation in the acceptability of these embedded imperatives. And that might the predicates that license this might vary. Yeah. So I think, but I think there is this. This is probably more of an embedded imperative, and thank God for the distinction between second singular and other stuff. Yes.
Yeah, Rajesh.
Yeah.
I find it difficult to accept. मैं सोचता हूँ कि तुम आज जल्दी सो जाओ. As Sadaf said, it's kind of it's weird.
Okay, and there was I see something in chat.
I was also looking at another one, a different sentence. मुझे एक ऐसी किताब चाहिए जो बच्चों के लिए हो. You could also say मुझे कोई ऐसी किताब चाहिए जो बच्चों के लिए हो. कोई ऐसी किताब.
Oh yes. So that is also interesting. कोई ऐसी कोई and कोई ऐसी. These are all. I think these are all. So I have not sort of thought through these because I think these things get very complicated. But I think we are getting into the domain of free choice. So basically, the when you combine aisi koi aisi, it's interesting. First of all, that they can come in either order, because often in the nominal domain, the modifiers are relatively fixed. But aisi koi and koi aisi both work, and I don't know if there is a semantic difference. But I'm going to sort of stare at these a little bit more. So koi aisi kitab, aisi koi kitab.
You can say मुझे एक ऐसी किताब चाहिए, but you cannot say मुझे एक किताब कोई चाहिए. You cannot use ek and koi at the same time.
Yeah, but I think you can also do ऐसी एक, right? मुझे ऐसी एक किताब चाहिए.
Yeah, you can do that.
So it's interesting that this ऐसी is not quite in the same. It's not in the determiner or modifier. Like it seems to have a slightly different life from these other guys. So thank you. I'm going to think about this. Sadaf, actually, I mean, later on, I would maybe curious about what happens. I guess in Kashmiri, some of the distinctions that we see in Hindi will not be visible because the future and the subjunctive will look the same. So it may be that the subjunctive, what I'm calling the subjunctive, will just appear more widely than the Hindi subjunctive. Yeah. So that's.
Yeah, probably. I have not looked at it. I'll need to think a little more.
Of course, yeah.
I have more questions, but I'll let other people ask.
Yeah. Thank you.
We can talk later.
Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Yeah. Shubham, there's a question from Shubham.
Hi Rajesh.
Hi.
So I just have a data question. आप
Mhm.
आप पराठा खाइए. It's
Yes.
I think imperative sentence. And the
Mhm.
second sentence is आप पराठा खाइएगा. So I don't know what's happening between means what is ga is
So yeah,
standing.
yeah. So for me, that yeah. So that. So I have deliberately kind of not included these polite imperatives in this, even though of course these things are relevant because you probably it's some of the same morphology, but so for me, if I say "aap paratha khaiye," that's I can just say that. If I say "khaiega," I need to add something more. I either want to ask that as a question: "Aap paratha khaiega?" Will you eat paratha? Or I need to add a modal like or an adverb like "zarur." "Aap paratha zarur khaiega." You should definitely eat it. Without that. Uh, I find that the khayega feels uh, kind of not perfect. But I don't know if you share that judgment.
Yeah, it's question. The second.
Yeah, without the yeah. So yeah. So I, but so I this the polite khayega. I mean what they're doing is we, they are probably similar to kai and kaiga. So kai, so one could draw the following analogy. You could say subjunctive, plain subjunctive is to the future as the polite imperative is to the future imperative. But why iega needs a zarur, I don't know. So I see there are some hands here, Vyom and then Sadaf.
No, I think my hand was earlier.
From before. Okay, so then it's Vyom.
Thank you, Rajesh.
Hi, Vyom. I don't hear anything from you, Vyom. Vyom? Hello?
Hello.
Yeah.
Yeah, am I audible now?
Yeah. No, now
Yes.
you're
Yeah.
audible. So for a second, I didn't hear anything. Yeah.
Yeah. So sorry about that. So thank you. It was a very good and lovely talk, and so much to think about. So I just wanted to gather your views on this one particular thing that we have been noticing, and which you also articulated while answering Lyudmila's question, was that the free choice property of things. So I wanted to get your attention to the difference between the subjunctive and imperative, which you have highlighted. That in a particular true imperative sentence, you have this belief of the command giver that
Mm-hmm.
this has to be done without any options. There are
Mm-hmm.
no yes or no's in this. This has to be done. Whereas in a polite imperative or where there is subjunctive marking, there would
Mm-hmm.
be it would be obviously spoken to someone who has more I don't know more respect or more formality involved, and
Mm-hmm.
you would say, I want this work to be done, but it could also not be done. It's up to you.
Mm-hmm.
It's a choice. So again, this free choice property comes there as well, right? So I wanted to know
I
your
see
views on
what
this.
you're saying. I see that the so you're
Like there's
that's
an optionality.
yeah. No, that's a very nice thought, which is that the politeness is coming via choice.
Yeah,
I have not thought. So I mean, I've been just talking about. We've been throwing terms like this is polite, this is not. But what you're suggesting is that we can reduce the politeness um, follows from choice, which is given to you by the subjunctive, and
yeah.
Okay, and this is kind of interesting because, as I said at the beginning of the talk, like Masika refers to this, what I'm calling subjunctive, as a contingent future. He says this is, so think of it as an existential future. It's a something which says like, yeah, this might happen. So there are worlds where this happens. So it's like an existential future. And of course, it's sometimes useful to talk about a definite future, that something will happen.
Yes, right.
And then a lot of languages have innovated a way of drawing a distinction between the plain future, the contingent future, and the other future.
Right,
But
right.
in Hindi, since this is so it gives you, it says, there is a world where you do this. And of course, and that is polite, as opposed to the imperative, where I guess you're not giving people a choice. You're saying,
So this property of free choiceness would be resounding everywhere, even with the examples of AC where you give. So thank you.
Right. So one of the things I really want to think more about is this business of aisi koi and koi aisi, and how those things are interacting with this. So, and I think because that's a domain where more of this free choice stuff is going to come in. Yes. Okay. Thank you, Tom. And there's a question from Jay.
Yeah. This is actually a question from me.
Oh, it's from you. Yeah, sorry, it just says.
Yeah, I know it's Jay. Today we are using Jay's computer.
Yeah.
So I think you probably said this, but I don't know if I missed it. That is looking at 32, interpretation and scope in the Spanish subjunctive, and the Hindi aisi gaadi chahiye jo sundar dikhti ho, sundar dikhti hai. And earlier we had examples with wo, no? Wo. Don't you get the same scope difference even with the distal demonstrative wo?
Oh yes, no, but the thing is, I did not use the distal demonstrative because once you use the distal demonstrative, then the subjunctive already gets degraded.
No, because I think you had put them in. I don't remember which sentence.
No, let me see.
वो किताब जो बच्चों के लिए उपयुक्त हो.
No, let me go back to that example. I think the McGregor example is here. It's yes. So I have this. Can you see? Is this still? No, it's not. It's not showing it. Let me show.
Just tell me the number. I've got
it's just one second. Subjunctive RC share. Yeah, it's 18 and 19.
18. Okay. Yeah. So 18. No, I wasn't thinking of 18 and 19, Rajesh. I was thinking of somewhere where you weren't sure about the wo, which was wo kitab chahiye jo bachon ke liye upyukt hai or ho. 27, I think.
27, yes.
And 20, A, B, and C.
Yes, so I think what I was, yes. Kitab. Oh, 27, yes. Yeah, also, but this is the same thing, which is, I think my intuition is that with wo, there's already a clash between wo, using a regular demonstrative and a subjunctive relative. Maybe it can be rescued, but
I don't, my judgments are very different then.
Okay.
Because it seems to me that I can say that wo kitab chahiye jo bachon ke liye upyukt ho, without any implication that there is any such book in the world.
Okay. So then I'm actually, then what I would say is that's
exactly like I saw.
Yeah. So then I think maybe we're using our demonstrative slightly differently, but it would fit with the idea. And so then I would actually expand what I'm saying a little bit. What I would say is that I will say that even in that case, the relative clause is actually first combined with wo.
Yes. Okay. And yes. No. What I'm trying to say is that I get exactly the same ambiguity there, that you get.
Okay, perfect. So that's great. That's great. So I mean,
And,
you might even be able to convince me because I wrote this in kind of a rush and I wasn't
मैं वो
completely sure.
आदमी से शादी करूंगी जो लंबा नहीं हो, you know.
Yeah. So
I'll only marry such a man. That man.
Yeah, I get a little bit of a confound, but I think I can, if I can shift myself into a space where I can, but I think the important, actually in a way, as you see, right, in what I'm saying, the demonstrative plays no role. The important issue is the one that you mentioned, which is that you get the scopal ambiguity, that when you use the subjunctive, you don't get existence.
Yes.
Yeah. And so, and then there's a separate issue of which anaphoric device you have to go through.
Yes. So my thought on that was, first of all, that wo does the same thing, and secondly, that ye will not do it.
Yes.
I find a difference between ye and wo.
So that is also very interesting because
even in English, I want that book which nobody has written yet.
Yes. So
that book which nobody has written yet. That's fine, isn't it? But I'm going to write. I'm going to write this book that no one has written yet is impossible, and I'm going to write such a book that no one has written yet, I suppose.
Yeah. So that's and the such and the essa. It's interesting is that we use essa, and here in this case we don't use vesa. This is something that sort of surprises me, right? Why? So if we are using essa, which is the proximal simulative, then why don't we use? So
that's very odd. Yes, that's interesting. Yes. So one other question, Rajesh, very quickly.
Yes.
That is, I'm not sure what you said about the tense in the subjunctive. Is if it's dependent on the tense of the.
So I mean, it's just dependent in the sense, what I actually meant for something a little bit weaker, in the sense that we don't have a past subjunctive, so we don't have no freedom.
Right. But then that suggests that it's not fully finite, or it's finite in some more limited sense, because finite clauses don't have dependent tense. At least I thought.
Right. So I mean, it's tricky, right? I mean, because I just. Finiteness is one of those tricky notions, right? As it's very difficult, right? So that's why I put my ground. I defined it using solid ground. I said finite. Yes. Person agreement, overt subjects, finite.
Yeah. So I was interested because that means you unpack it in terms of these three characteristics of finiteness. And here, subjunctive is a kind of clause which has dependent tense but has overt subjects. And
person agreement is usually associated with finite clauses. That shows up. So for that reason, I am tempted to. That's why, like, it walks and talks like a finite clause. But yes, as you point out, one thing finite clauses generally are not is dependent, but this is definitely dependent.
Yeah, I was interested because that's just my problem with Dravidian.
So in Dravidian, it's actually even more acute, this question, right? And you have diagnostics for it, right? You in a series of papers, and Jay in a series. I mean, you connect it with modality, right? Like if you can get modal elements.
We unpacked finiteness, separated tense from finiteness. So it looks like here you have an argument to do that. I was just wondering. Yeah, those fine. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Rajesh, there is a comment from.
Let me look at it.
Rajesh has written something.
Yes. So, some example from Hindi, Ram Kare. That's also very. That is interesting. Also, I'm going to write this example down because this is also interesting because the matrix is also subjunctive. Ram kare ki aisa ho jaye, right? So aisa ho jaye, let me think, aisa kare ki aisa ho jaye. And so, yeah, so may Ram do this, and then so there is, yeah, there is a song from this movie that, so my nickname, I think it's from the movie Bobby, which is Hum tum ek kamre mein band ho aur chabi kho jaye. Right, so that is also subjunctive, right? And that is Ram kare aisa ho jaye, right? So let me just write this. Okay, this is a nice example. I think it fits into the paradigm of a may kind of thing, matrix may licensing, then an embedded subjunctive. And yeah, so that's this. I think in a way I was wondering why the subjunctive shows up so often in poetry and so on, but maybe it's just because it talks about possibilities, things which are unreal. And so it's popular, people like to use it. It's useful to use it in poetry and in songs.
Also Ram Jane, maybe, I don't know.
Ram Jane is also, I think, also at least superficially looks Ram Kare, Ram Jane. These are all subjunctives, and I don't know whether they on the form they look like subjunctives. So yeah. So thank you for that. Yeah, Ludmila?
I wanted to say that previously, that what we call subjunctive now was just present at the previous stages of historical development. Yeah. So, and poetry is always archaic. So maybe that.
Okay. Yes. So that may also be, yes. Though a lot of the usages that I've seen don't easily. Yeah, so one thing would be when we said, so I know that people, yeah, Masika says old present. The question is what was the meaning of the present, right? That's what was the semantic range of the present in the past? I mean, in the earlier stages of the language, I don't know that. So because there's no aspect there, right? So even in English, right? In English, if you say John eats an apple, that only is habitual. You have to say, so I don't know when people say John go old present to school, what did it mean? Did it mean he is going to school, or did he goes to school? Was it like the present tense, like in German, for example, or like the present tense in English? I don't know that. But that might be interesting. And the point that you make about archaic usages might very well be there. Yes. So let me also write this down. So old present. So if people have any other thoughts, I think we are probably
running out of time. But yeah, I myself wanted to ask you a couple of questions. Of course, my knowledge about Hindi-Urdu is less, but I'm more interested in the semantic part. Coming to the example number 15, the as-if clauses, because
yes,
you said it is a puzzle to you, and the boy was standing at the door as if waiting for someone. Like in your talk, you mentioned it could be a conditional statement. I'm just seeing it as perhaps a desire or a hope. It's not conditional. It's a hope. I have a hope someone is, maybe I'm waiting for a friend or I'm waiting for my partner. I'm just expecting someone. So that's not conditional. It's a hope. So, and that might be different to see. I do not know whether you would consider it as, can you substitute it with some other adverbs of hope or desire and see whether it
so we could actually
hello?
So yeah. So I'm just thinking about this. So which is, if we replace, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. So we can test this, right? Whether, so in this case, my intuition is that this is a little bit more neutral. So imagine a situation where the boy is standing there and he's looking scared. So जैसे किसी के डर में बच्चा दरवाजे पर ऐसे खड़ा था जैसे किसी की याद में, I mean, sorry, this is too, जैसे किसी की याद में वेवल हो, so as if like distraught in someone's memory. So I think that can work. So it doesn't sound like it has to be, it doesn't have to be hope. It's describing his appearance, and it's not even saying that he is waiting for someone. It just looks. So yeah, so I the funny thing about
it's
this
example,
yeah,
maybe, I mean, it's certainly not conditional, but it is maybe, even if you do not want to say hope, maybe some kind of expectation. It can be in the positive direction or the negative. Either you're scared or you're waiting with high hopes of seeing someone, or with high hopes of not seeing someone, but then you're scared, but still there is a hope in a different sense.
Right, I see. So, yeah. So let me just
that's, I mean, you can look into it. But then I was also interested in knowing the expressions of the utterances in 36 versus 37. I'm curious to know which one is natural. Because the moment you use a subjunctive relative clause, does that make it more natural for you as a native speaker?
Okay, so I feel that this is one point which I feel now, I mean, having looked at a lot of data on the subjunctive, I feel the subjunctive is alive and well in Hindi right now. It's not, people are using it, people are freely using it, people have competence in it. So in some sense, it just is what you want to say. So if you want to say something, this is the subjunctive is the device that Hindi has for, I'll just read this out from what McGregor said. McGregor wrote, the subjunctive relative clause is often used when an object is presented generically as typical of a class rather than as an individual entity. Okay, so for example, like the idea about ghosts, right? So when you are talking about a particular ghost, or like even a particular set of existing ghosts, then you use the indicative. But when you are talking about a description, right, like something, a characterization, then you use the subjunctive. And that's the choice. So they're both natural. It just depends upon what you want to say.
So the context plays a vital role.
Yes, absolutely, yes. So it's but it's not a marked form. It may be slightly less lower frequency than the simple present, but it's still like, you know, it's not like something where you have to jog the memory of speakers. People know that it exists.
Yeah. So one last thing from my side, because I should not take people's time. See, I used to work on modality. So I'm just seeing there are some parallels between subjunctive mode or mood, whatever you have said, is equivalent to the Dionysic models. But of course...
Yes, absolutely. So I think there is very, very, very close links. I mean, and in fact, at least in Hindi, right, like matrix, in matrix environments, instead of using should in questions, people use the subjunctive. So instead of saying, should I go, you would say, मैं जाऊं. Right? So jaun, which is just go subjunctive, is how one says, should I go? So really, it is really the case. I mean, of course, the question is there actually a should there, or are we getting the should by doing some kind of more indirect reasoning and so on? That might be the case. But for all practical purposes, it is a modal. I mean, there is no escaping. So yeah. So
and also the same parallel I can draw between the uncertainty, what you have shown in a few examples, with the epistemic possibility, because I'm sure it is not occurring with epistemic necessity models, but it's equivalent to more or less the epistemic possibilities, like the kind of like, how do we say, like it might rain, that kind of examples, or he may be there because his bike
Yes.
is there.
Okay, yeah, that's something I need to test actually, which is I just threw the models at you, but like I haven't. So that would be my guess also, but I haven't checked whether it's possible with epistemic necessity. That's something I need to check.
That's all from my side. It was a lovely talk. There is one more comment, no question from
Yeah,
Paulami.
yeah, it's from Polami. I've actually copied it, but I think she just left. So
Okay.
yeah.
Anyway, so are there any other questions from the audience?
And if people don't if you read the handout at your leisure and you have other thoughts or suggestions for me, please email me. If you have thoughts about how this works in a language other than Hindi, or you disagree with the data, or you have some other data, or you'd just like to talk, please email me.
Thank you so much, Professor Bhatt, for your lovely, stimulating talk that led to a lot of interesting discussions. We are so fortunate that people could spare their time and be with us. Like we had the pleasure of listening to you for almost an hour and a half, now more than that. Here it is 7:15 Indian Standard Time.
Yeah.
We were very happy to have amongst us Professor Poklova, Professor Subbarao, Professor Jaishilan, Professor Amarthavalli, Professor Rajesh Deva is in YouTube, Professor Avdesh was with us here, Professor Shailendra Mohan, and many of my CIL colleagues, and a lot of people from different parts of the world. I mean, it's not possible to thank everyone, but I take this opportunity to thank Rajesh on behalf of CIL and on my own personal behalf for accepting our invitation. You took very less time to just say yes to us. Very interesting topic, and I'm sure somebody has written here, it's very nice that we are doing such series of lectures. I'm sure many more would look into this video on YouTube or Facebook and benefit from your talk. So I should say it was a very interesting talk once again.
Yes.
And
Is just Professor saying something?
Professor Subbarao has raised his hand. And I once again thank everyone. Yeah, Professor Subbarao.
You're muted. I haven't seen Professor Subbarao for a long time. Lutulaji, I think I saw in Paris last.
Paris, yeah. We all met in Paris.
You were also there, right, in Paris? Yeah. Yeah. It's
Ludmila was there. Nice. Boris, me, Peter
yes.
Hook.
Yes. Very nice to see everyone. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you once again. You have a lovely evening, and Rajesh, you can have your breakfast. And
yes.
Sadaf can also enjoy the breakfast. It was lovely to see Sadaf.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. It was good to see all of you.
Yes.
Yeah, good to see all of you.
Yeah.
Enjoy your day and have a lovely evening. Others, yeah. Thank you. Bye, Rajesh.
Bye-bye.